Leora stood across from me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping rhythmically on her wineglass. She'd just dropped a bomb that obliterated 23 years of marriage with the same casual tone she'd used to discuss weekend plans. "I've decided to see other men," she announced, taking a measured sip of her Cabernet. "Starting tonight, actually." The scotch burned in my throat as I tried to process her words. My mind raced through our recent conversations, searching for signs I might have missed. Sure, we'd grown distant, the passion had cooled. But this? "I'm not asking for permission, Des." She set down her glass with a soft clink. "I'm telling you how things are going to be." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could I possibly say to this woman who'd shared my bed, raised our children, built a life with me, and was now calmly announcing she planned to destroy it all? Her heels clicked against the hard wood as she walked toward the stairs. I watched her go, my body feeling like lead, unable to move or call out. The familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the air. Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance she'd worn on our wedding day. The sound of drawers opening and closing drifted down from our bedroom. She was getting ready, probably picking out an outfit, touching up her makeup. 23 years of memories flashed through my mind. Our first apartment, the birth of our kids, family vacations, countless shared moments, all suddenly feeling like scenes from someone else's life. I sat there, gripping my glass, listening to my wife prepare for a date with another man. The ice in my scotch had melted completely, diluting what was left. Just like my marriage, I thought bitterly, watered down to nothing. I sat there at our kitchen table, my mind still reeling from Leora's announcement. The gentle tick of our antique wall clock marked each excruciating minute as I stared at the wood-grain patterns, trying to make sense of how my life had unraveled in mere moments. The familiar creaks of our upstairs floorboards pulled me from my daze. My stomach clenched. She was getting ready. For someone else. The thought made bile rise in my throat. An hour crawled by before I heard her descending the stairs. The sound of her heels on the hardwood made me look up, and the sight knocked the wind from my lungs. Leora stood there, transformed. The black dress she wore wasn't new. I remembered buying it with her last year for a charity gala. But tonight it felt different, dangerous. It hugged her curves in a way that reminded me painfully of younger days, when that allure was meant for me alone. Her auburn hair was swept up in a high ponytail, exposing the elegant line of her neck. The subtle shimmer of her makeup caught the kitchen lights, highlighting cheekbones that suddenly seemed sharper, more severe. I pushed away from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound felt jarring in the heavy silence between us. My legs carried me to the foyer before my brain caught up, and I found myself blocking her path to the door. "Move, Desmond." Her voice held no warmth. "We need to talk about this. You can't just..." My voice cracked. 23 years, Leora. Don't we deserve more than a 5-minute conversation? What's left to discuss? She adjusted her clutch, not meeting my eyes. I've made my decision. The decision to throw away our marriage? I couldn't even say it. At least tell me why. What did I do wrong? A biting smile crossed her lips, the kind I'd seen her use on difficult clients, but never on me. You'll get over it, Desmond. She stepped around me like I was nothing more than furniture. The click of her heels on our hardwood floors echoed with devastating finality. The door opened and closed, and just like that, she was gone. I stood there in our foyer, staring at the door, the ghost of her perfume hanging in the air. The woman who'd just walked out wasn't the same one I'd married all those years ago. Or maybe she was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. The house feels like a tomb now. Each creak of the floorboards, each tick of the clock echoes through empty rooms that used to hold our laughter. I've taken to sleeping in the guest room. The thought of our bed, with its memories of tender moments and whispered conversations, is too much to bear. Last night, I heard her heels clicking across the hard wood at 2 a.m. The sound made my stomach turn. She hadn't even tried to be quiet anymore, letting the door slam behind her. The scent of unfamiliar cologne drifted up the stairs, mixing with the artificial sweetness of cocktails. Our morning routine has become a hollow dance. We orbit each other in the kitchen, two celestial bodies, bound by gravity but never touching. She pours her coffee, I make my toast. The silence between us fills with unspoken accusations. The gardener's coming today, I mentioned this morning just to say something. She didn't even look up from her phone. Whatever. The calendar on the fridge still shows our anniversary date circled in red. 23 years reduced to a mark on paper. Meaningless now. I catch her sometimes, getting ready in front of the hallway mirror. She preens and primps, applying lipstick that isn't for me anymore. When our eyes meet in the reflection, there's nothing there, no warmth, no recognition of our shared history. Yesterday I tried one more time. Can we talk about this? About us? There's nothing to discuss. Her voice carried the same dismissive tone she uses with telemarketers. I've made my decision. Each night she goes out feels like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I lie awake in the guest room, listening for her return, hating myself for still caring. The woman who comes home isn't my Leora. She's a stranger wearing my wife's face, carrying herself with a cold confidence that cuts like a knife. When we do speak, it's about bills or household maintenance. Even these conversations feel like negotiations with an adversary, rather than discussions with a life partner. Her casual cruelty in these moments, the way she checks her watch or scrolls through her phone while I'm speaking, makes me question every memory we've shared. I've stopped trying to eat dinner at regular times. The dining room table where we used to share our days over home-cooked meals now sits unused. Instead, I grab whatever's convenient and eat standing at the kitchen counter, like a traveler passing through someone else's home. I've started avoiding the dining room entirely. The emptiness of that space, where we used to share meals, laughter, celebrations. It's too much. Instead, I find myself sitting in my old study, surrounded by dusty photographs and faded memories. Each one feels like a punch to the gut. I remember meeting Leora in 8th grade. She was already turning heads back then, this whirlwind of auburn hair and infectious laughter. The popular boys circled her like moths to a flame, but somehow she noticed me, the quiet kid who helped her with algebra. I can still picture her sliding into the seat next to mine, her textbook deliberately forgotten. The memories flood back unbidden. Homecoming, where she chose me over the football captain. Our first kiss behind the gym. The way other guys looked at me with disbelief. How did Desmond Ilaric land someone like Leora? Even then, I knew she enjoyed their envy, their attention, but I was too smitten to care. College was more of the same. While I buried myself in accounting books, Leora became the life of every party. She'd always come back to me, though, regaling tales of her social conquests. I'd listen, proud to be her safe harbor. What a fool I was. The sound of keys in the door pulls me from my reverie. Leora breezes in, her perfume mixing with unfamiliar scents. She spots me in the kitchen and surprisingly takes a seat across from me, perfectly manicured hands wrapping around her coffee mug. "We should talk, Desmond." Her voice carries that familiar businesslike tone she uses in board meetings. I've heard it enough times over dinner parties, watching her charm clients and colleagues alike. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about you, or us, or even our marriage. I'm 46. Do you know what that means? I'm not ready to settle into some quiet, predictable life. I need more. I deserve to enjoy what's left of my youth." She takes a careful sip of coffee, her lipstick leaving a perfect crimson mark on the rim. "I'll always come back home. This is still where I belong, but I need this for myself." Looking at her now, I see what I've been blind to all these years. Her charm, her magnetism. They weren't just qualities, they were weapons. And I've been taking direct hits for over 2 decades, believing each wound was a sign of love. I'd been thinking about this conversation for weeks, rehearsing it in my head during sleepless nights in the guest room. The sound of Leora's heels clicking against the hardwood floor announced her return from another late night out. I waited in the living room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. She breezed past me, the unfamiliar cologne trailing behind her like a slap in the face. Before she could disappear upstairs, I cleared my throat. "We need to talk." Her perfectly manicured eyebrows arched slightly as she turned. "At this hour? Really, Desmond?" "Yes, at this hour." I stood up, squaring my shoulders. This situation, what you're doing, it needs to end. Either we work on our marriage, get counseling, whatever it takes, or we end it. For good." A small laugh escaped her lips, not the warm one I remembered from our early years, but something cold and dismissive. She placed her clutch on the side table and crossed her arms. "An ultimatum? That's not very like you." "Maybe that's been the problem." Leora's hazel eyes studied me, the way they used to assess potential clients before a big pitch. "You won't leave me, Desmond." The certainty in her voice made my stomach clench. She took a step closer, that familiar predatory confidence radiating from her. "The kids would never forgive you," she continued, her voice silky smooth. "And let's be honest, where would you go? What would you do?" Her lips curved into that practiced smile. "You wouldn't find anyone else like me." The worst part was how casual she sounded, like she was discussing the weather rather than dismantling 23 years of marriage. My hands balled into fists, anger burning in my chest. But I kept quiet, watching her smirk grow wider at my silence. She took my lack of response as victory, just like she always did. Moving past me, she started up the stairs, the sound of her heels echoing through our hollow home. I stood there, teeth clenched, realizing that this was exactly what she expected. Me, standing still, taking whatever she threw my way. But something had shifted inside me. As I watched her disappear upstairs, I knew this wasn't about winning an argument anymore. This was about survival. And for the first time in our marriage, I began to seriously consider my escape from this elegant prison she'd constructed around us. I sat in my office, staring at the email confirmation from my lawyer. The divorce papers had been served to Leora at her workplace about an hour ago. My hands trembled as I set down my coffee mug, the bitter taste in my mouth matching my mood. The familiar weight of my wedding ring felt like a shackle now. The quiet of my office was shattered by my phone buzzing across the desk. Leora's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice, 3 times, gathering my resolve before answering. Her sobs came through immediately, echoing in what sounded like a bathroom stall. The sound brought back memories of holding her through tears of joy when our children were born, through tears of grief when her father passed. But those memories felt hollow now, tainted by recent months. "How could you do this to me, Desmond?" Her voice cracked, a mixture of fury and despair. "At my workplace? In front of everyone?" I closed my eyes, remembering all the nights I'd spent alone in our house while she was out with other men. The casual way she'd dismissed my feelings, my dignity. The coldness in her eyes when she'd told me she didn't need my permission. "You did this to us, Leora." My voice came out steady, surprising even myself. The words felt like ice on my tongue, but they needed to be said. She launched into a tirade about discretion and reputation, about what people would think. The same Leora who hadn't cared what I thought when she'd announced her intentions to see other men. The same Leora who'd smiled at me across our kitchen table while destroying our marriage. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, letting her words wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief. The choice had been made. The papers were served. There was no going back now. The flood of texts started 3 days after I served her the divorce papers. At first, just innocent messages about bills and household items. Then came the photos. Us on our honeymoon in Maui. Christmas mornings with the kids. That summer barbecue where we danced in the rain. Each one a carefully aimed arrow meant to pierce my resolve. I deleted them without responding. The calls followed. I let them go to voicemail, but Leora was relentless. 10 missed calls in one afternoon. Her voice messages started composed, almost businesslike, before cracking with emotion near the end. "Remember when we first moved into this house? How we stayed up all night painting the kitchen because you said we needed to make it ours?" My finger hovered over the delete button. For a moment, I could smell the fresh paint, hear her laughter as she got more on herself than the walls. But then I remembered her walking out the door in that black dress, the unfamiliar cologne, the casual way she dismissed 2 decades of marriage. Silly. She cornered me in the driveway one morning as I was leaving for work. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, dark circles under her eyes betraying sleepless nights. The sight of her vulnerability should have moved me. Instead, I felt nothing. "We need to talk about this, Days." Her voice trembled. 23 years, you can't just throw that away." I adjusted my tie, kept my voice steady. "You already did that when you decided to see other men." Oh, that was different." I was confused. "I made a mistake." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "We can fix this. Remember how good we were together?" "We are being the operative word." Her face crumpled. "What happened to you? The Desmond I knew would have fought for us. That Desmond died the night you walked out in that black dress." Jess? For the first time since I'd known her, Leora seemed small. Her usual commanding presence diminished to something desperate and unfamiliar. She called after me as I got into my car, voice rising with panic. "I'll stop seeing them. I'll do whatever you want. Please, just talk to me." I drove away, watching her shrinking figure in my rearview mirror. The woman who had so confidently informed me she didn't need my permission to destroy our marriage now stood alone in our driveway, finally understanding what she had lost. Later that week, she left a photo album on my bed. Inside was a handwritten letter detailing every happy moment we'd shared, every milestone, every private joke. The same manipulative charm she had used to control me for years now turned up to 11 in a last-ditch effort to regain her power. I placed the album in a box with the rest of our married life and sealed it shut. Her text grew increasingly frantic. "You can't just stop loving someone overnight. Remember how you used to look at me? We can start over." But she was wrong. I hadn't stopped loving her overnight. It had happened gradually. Each late night out, each dismissive gesture, each moment of casual cruelty chipping away at what we had, until there was nothing left but muscle memory and habit. When my lawyer called to say Leora was contesting the divorce, I wasn't surprised. She had always needed to be in control. But this time, her usual tactics weren't working. Her beauty, her charm, her carefully crafted manipulations bounced off me like rain on a window. The desperation in her eyes when we passed each other in the hallway no longer moved me. The woman I had loved was gone, and in her place stood a stranger who had finally realized she couldn't have everything on her terms. Moving into my new apartment felt like stepping into a different life entirely. After years of living in Laura's carefully curated world, the simple one-bedroom space represented something I hadn't felt in decades. Freedom. I filled it with basic furniture, hung a few abstract prints I'd always liked but Laura had vetoed, and actually felt at peace with the minimalism of it all. My old college friend, Tom, dragged me out to a bar one Friday night. I tried to beg off, making excuses about unpacking, but he wouldn't hear it. The place was crowded, music thumping through the speakers, and I felt completely out of my element. But then something unexpected happened. A woman at the bar caught my eye and smiled. Not the practiced, calculated smile I'd grown used to from Leora, but something genuine and warm. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Her work as a librarian, my terrible attempts at cooking for one, our shared love of old mystery novels. When she gave me her number at the end of the night, I felt a forgotten flutter of excitement in my chest. More outings followed. Dinner with colleagues turned into drinks with new friends. A cooking class introduced me to Sarah, who laughed at my disasters in the kitchen, but still agreed to coffee afterward. Each interaction helped me rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. My dry sense of humor, my ability to hold engaging conversations, my own quiet charm that had nothing to do with Leora's carefully orchestrated social performances. Meanwhile, Leora seemed to be spiraling. She'd call late at night, her voice slightly slurred, rambling about the men she was seeing. But beneath her forced enthusiasm, I heard something hollow, empty. She'd show up at places she knew I frequented, dressed to kill but with dark circles under her eyes that her expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. One afternoon I overheard her talking to Marisol at the coffee shop near my office. I ducked behind a display of coffee beans, not proud of eavesdropping but unable to walk away. "I don't understand," Leora was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "This is what I wanted. Freedom. Adventure. Why does it feel so meaningless?" Marisol's response was exactly what I'd expect from her. "You're just going through an adjustment period, honey. Keep exploring. The right guy will come along." But I heard the tremor in Leora's laugh, saw how her hands shook as she lifted her cup. The woman who had so confidently destroyed our marriage was nowhere to be seen. In her place sat someone I barely recognized. Someone who looked lost, searching for something she couldn't name in an endless string of shallow encounters. I left before they could spot me, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity, just a profound sense of relief that I was no longer caught in her orbit, no longer responsible for filling the void she carried within herself. For the first time in years, I was living my life for me, and it felt incredible. The coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning crowd when Alora showed me her engagement ring, my little girl, all grown up and ready for her next chapter. We spent an hour discussing her plans, her eyes lighting up with each detail she shared. The joy in that moment felt pure, untainted. That changed when the aura got involved. During the initial planning meeting at our old house, she swept in with her typical commanding presence, armed with a binder full of ideas and suggestions. The tension crackled as soon as she noticed me sitting at the kitchen table. "We need to discuss the wedding arrangements." Leora's voice carried that familiar, authoritative tone. "I think it would be best if we both attended alone, for Alora's sake, to avoid any complications." The old me might have nodded along, might have accepted her terms to keep the peace, but I'd learned to stand my ground. "Actually, I'll be bringing Esme." I kept my voice steady, matching her gaze. "I'm covering the wedding costs, and she's an important part of my life now." Leora's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the tabletop. "This isn't about you, Desmond. Think about Elora. Think about the photos, the seating arrangements." "I have thought about it, and I've discussed it with Elora." I straightened in my chair. "She understands and supports my decision." The color rose in Leora's cheeks, her composure cracking. She turned to Elora, expecting her daughter to take her side, but Elora just continued sketching flower arrangements in her notebook. "This is ridiculous." Leora's voice rose slightly. "You're being selfish, making this about yourself." "No, Leora, I'm being honest about my life, just like you were about yours when you decided to see other men during our marriage." Her mouth snapped shut. The familiar tactics, the guilt trips, the manipulation, bounced off me now. The realization dawned in her eyes. Her influence over my choices had evaporated. She gathered her things and left the kitchen, the sharp click of her heels echoing her frustration. I stood near the edge of the reception hall, watching my daughter dance with her new husband. Esme's hand rested comfortably in mine, her presence a steady anchor through the evening's festivities. The sight of Leora stumbling around with her date, some guy named Brad she'd met at a bar, made my stomach turn. Brad had been loud and inappropriate since the ceremony, making crude jokes during the father of the bride's speech and spilling wine on one of the centerpieces. Leora kept laughing too loudly at his jokes, her face flushed from too much champagne. It was embarrassing to watch. I caught Elora's eyes across the room as she observed the stark contrast between her parents' lives. The disappointment on her face when she looked at her mother was impossible to miss. During the father-daughter dance earlier, she'd whispered how grateful she was that I'd brought Esme, how much calmer everything felt with her there. "Dad," she'd said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it before. How Mom treated you all those years?" The evening progressed, and I noticed Leora getting increasingly agitated. Her eyes kept darting between Esme and me, her expression darkening with each glass of wine. When Brad stumbled off to the bar for the dozenth time, Leora finally snapped. She stormed across the dance floor, her designer dress askew, and planted herself directly in front of Esme. The venom in her voice carried across the nearby tables. "You think you're so perfect, don't you, swooping in and stealing my husband?" Esme remained perfectly still beside me, her grip on my hand never wavering. Her voice came out steady and clear, carrying none of the hostility Leora was radiating. "He left you because you didn't value him. Don't blame me for loving a man who deserves it." I watched the color drain from Leora's face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since our divorce began, I saw the reality of her choices finally hit her. She stood there, swaying slightly, looking lost and small in a way I'd never seen before. The holidays came and went, marking nearly a year since the divorce was finalized. I found myself spending more time with different women who added color to my life in their own unique ways. There was Sarah, the artist who showed me the beauty of abstract paintings; Michelle, the chef who reignited my passion for cooking; and Clara, who shared my love for obscure documentaries. None of these relationships demanded more than I was willing to give, and that freedom felt refreshing. I ran into Leora at our local coffee shop one morning. She looked different. Her usually perfect makeup seemed hastily applied, and her designer clothes hung loosely on her frame. She tried to catch my eye, but I just nodded politely and continued with my order. Later that week, my phone lit up with a message from her. I miss us, Des. Remember how we used to spend Sunday mornings? Just talking for hours. I let the message sit unanswered. Those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life now. My phone buzzed again. Can we meet? Just to talk? I replied with a simple, "No need. Take care, Leora." Through Elora, I heard about Leora's string of failed relationships. Apparently, the excitement she'd sought outside our marriage had turned bitter. Her social media posts became sparse, no longer filled with photos of glamorous nights out. The few mutual friends we had mentioned she'd grown distant, cancelling plans last minute, or not showing up at all. One evening, while having dinner with Esme at my favorite Italian restaurant, Leora walked in alone. She spotted us and hesitated before approaching our table. Her eyes were glassy, maybe from wine. "Desmond, you look happy," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I am," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She lingered awkwardly, then finally whispered, "I made a mistake, didn't I?" I felt nothing but a distant pity. The woman who once held such power over my emotions now seemed small and lost. "Goodbye, Leora," I said firmly, turning back to my date. As she walked away, I realized I no longer needed her validation or approval. My happiness wasn't tied to her anymore. The contentment I felt came from within, built on the foundation of self-respect I had rediscovered after our divorce. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.